Fire danced across the ancient walls of the breeding chamber as 6 tiny creatures stirred within their crystalline shells. The sacred flames had burned for 300 years without pause, waiting for this moment when the royal bloodline would continue. Commander Theron walked slowly around the glowing eggs, his scaled hands clasped behind his back as he performed the ritual watch that had been his duty for the past month. The shells began to crack with sounds like breaking glass. Tiny claws pushing through as the future rulers of the Draconian Empire took their first breaths. Each hatchling was no bigger than a house cat, but their eyes held intelligence that would shame most adult beings across the galaxy. Their scales shimmered with colors that seemed to shift and change, deep blues mixing with silver, golden yellows, bleeding into rich purples. They were beautiful beyond description and more valuable than entire star systems. "The Emperor must be told immediately," whispered High Priestess Vera as she knelt beside the nearest hatchling. The tiny dragon looked up at her with eyes like liquid starlight and made a sound somewhere between a purr and a musical note. "They are perfect, absolutely perfect." Theron nodded and reached for his communication device, but something felt wrong. The air in the chamber seemed to vibrate with an energy that made his scales itch. The ancient flames flickered in a way they had never done before, dancing to some invisible rhythm that spoke of danger approaching. "Commander," called out Guard Captain Rix from his post by the main entrance. "The perimeter sensors are detecting some kind of interference. Nothing we can identify, but the readings are unlike anything in our databases." Before Theron could respond, the lights in the chamber began to dim, not from any power failure, but as if something was draining the energy from the very air. The sacred flames guttered and nearly went out, casting strange shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. The hatchlings sensed the disturbance and began to cry out in voices that sounded like wind chimes in a storm. "Sound the alarm," Theron ordered. But his words were cut short as every piece of technology in the chamber simply stopped working. Communication devices went silent, security monitors went dark, even the basic lighting systems failed completely. The only illumination came from the struggling sacred flames and the faint glow emanating from the hatchlings themselves. "High Priestess." Vera tried to gather the tiny dragons close to her body for protection, but something invisible seemed to pull them away from her grasp. The hatchlings floated through the air as if carried by gentle hands, their cries growing fainter as they drifted toward the chamber's rear wall. That wall began to shimmer like water and then simply wasn't there anymore. "Stop them," Theron shouted as he lunged forward, but his claws grasped only empty air. The opening in the wall sealed itself as quickly as it had appeared, leaving no trace that it had ever existed. The chamber's technology flickered back to life as if nothing had happened, but the crystalline shells lay empty and broken on the floor. 6 royal hatchlings had vanished without leaving so much as a scale behind. The investigation began within minutes but yielded almost nothing useful. The energy readings made no sense to anyone, showing patterns that matched no known galactic species or technology. The wall that had dissolved and reformed showed no signs of tampering, no molecular displacement, no residual energy traces that their most sensitive equipment could detect. "This is impossible," muttered Chief Engineer Dex as he ran his scanners over every surface in the chamber. "Nothing can bypass our security systems. The breeding chambers have defenses that could stop a full military assault. Yet something walked in here and took the hatchlings without triggering a single alarm. Emperor Draken himself arrived within hours, his massive form filling the chamber entrance as guards scrambled to make way. His golden scales seemed to burn with inner fire as rage built within him. The loss of his great-grandchildren was more than a family tragedy. It threatened the very future of their civilization. "Find them," the Emperor commanded, his voice echoing through the chamber like rolling thunder. "Mobilize every ship, contact every ally, interrogate every species. If necessary, someone has stolen the future of our empire and they will pay with their lives." Commander Theron knelt before his ruler and spoke carefully. "Your Majesty, the evidence suggests this was not the work of any known species. The technology required to accomplish this theft is beyond anything we have encountered. Perhaps we should consider that the hatchlings were taken by beings we have never made contact with." The Emperor's eyes blazed brighter as he considered this possibility. If some unknown species had the power to steal dragons from the most secure location in their empire, What else might they be capable of? Then we expand our search beyond the known galaxy. Send scouts to every unexplored system. Make contact with every primitive world that might harbor advanced beings. I want answers, and I want my heirs returned. News of the theft spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. The Draconian Empire was not known for its patience or restraint when threatened. Other civilizations began to worry about becoming targets of the search as Draconian fleets appeared in system after system, demanding answers and conducting invasive scans of any ships or stations they encountered. Meanwhile, in a distant corner of space that few beings had ever visited, a tiny escape pod drifted between the stars. Its hull was cracked and its systems were failing, but 6 small forms huddled together inside, sharing warmth and comfort as they projected their thoughts across the void, searching for someone who might help them. The hatchlings had not been stolen at all. They had fled for their lives when they sensed danger approaching their homeworld. Their psychic abilities, still developing but incredibly powerful, had detected the thoughts of someone who meant them harm, someone who wanted to use them as weapons rather than cherish them as the precious young beings they were. Now they drifted through space, growing weaker by the hour, their telepathic calls for help growing fainter as they struggled to survive. They needed to find someone with a kind heart and a strong protective instinct, someone whose mind was naturally shielded enough to hide them from those who would do them harm. Somewhere in the human colony systems, a mechanic named Roy Bennett tossed restlessly in his sleep, strange dreams filling his mind with images of small creatures calling out for help across the endless darkness of space. 3 weeks of searching had yielded nothing but frustration and growing tension across 12 star systems. Draconian warships hung in orbit around hundreds of worlds, their massive hulls casting shadows over planets that had never seen such displays of military might. Commander Theron stood in the command center of the flagship Eternal Flame, watching displays that showed negative results from every investigation. The Crystalline Collective has opened their hive minds for inspection, reported Intelligence Officer Nara, her voice tight with exhaustion. Their thoughts are too structured and geometric to hide deception. They genuinely know nothing about our missing royals. The hive mind swarms were equally cooperative. Their collective consciousness cannot conceal individual thoughts the way organic minds can. Theron nodded grimly as he studied the star charts spread before him. Red markers indicated systems already searched. Yellow ones showed investigations still in progress, and the vast empty spaces between them seemed to mock their efforts. What about the silicon-based entities from the Andromeda Spiral? Completely different thought patterns, Nara replied, consulting her reports. Their consciousness operates on geological timescales. They think in centuries rather than moments. If they had taken the hatchlings, they would still be deciding what to do with them. Besides, their energy signatures don't match what we detected in the breeding chamber. The search had revealed something troubling about the galaxy's political landscape. Many species were growing tired of draconian demands and intrusions. Worlds that had maintained friendly relations for decades were beginning to close their borders. Trade agreements were being questioned, and whispers of rebellion echoed through the outer systems. Your Majesty, Theron said, as Emperor Dracon materialized on the bridge's holographic communicator. Our investigation teams have eliminated most of the known species in this sector. The energy signature from the breeding chamber doesn't match any technology in our databases. We may be dealing with an entirely unknown civilization. The Emperor's image flickered with barely controlled rage, his golden scales seeming to burn, brighter with each passing day. Then find this unknown civilization. Expand the search to include every primitive world, every unexplored system, every species that claims to have no advanced technology. Someone is hiding my heirs, and I will not rest until they are found. Among the species being investigated were the humans, a young civilization that had only recently achieved faster than light travel. Their colonies were scattered across several systems populated by beings who seemed remarkably unremarkable compared to the galaxy's ancient races. They had no psychic abilities, no energy weapons, no planet-killing technologies that other species took for granted. The humans are an interesting case, reported Senior Investigator Core during the daily briefing. They possess natural mental shielding that makes them difficult to probe psychically. This could theoretically allow them to hide thoughts or intentions from our investigators, however. Their technology is primitive and their society appears genuinely peaceful. Theron considered this information carefully. The human mental shielding was indeed unusual. Most species either had strong psychic abilities or were completely open to telepathic intrusion. Humans existed in a strange middle ground where their minds were naturally resistant, but they couldn't project thoughts outward. Send investigation teams to all human colonies. Use the deepest scans available. If they're hiding something, we need to know what it is. On the human colony world of New Haven, life continued much as it always had despite the increased draconian presence in nearby systems. The mining operations that sustained the colony ran on schedule, the agricultural domes produced their crops, and the small population went about their daily routines with the casual indifference that humans showed toward galactic politics. Roy Bennett worked late in his repair shop as he had for the past several weeks, but his concentration was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. The strange dreams that had started 3 weeks ago were growing more vivid and more frequent. Images of small creatures drifting through space haunted his sleep, and even during waking hours he sometimes heard faint whispers in languages he didn't recognize. "You look terrible," said his neighbor Beth as she brought him a sandwich during his lunch break. "When was the last time you got a full night's sleep? These mining machines will still be here tomorrow, you know." Roy rubbed his tired eyes and tried to smile, but the effort felt forced. "Just been having weird dreams lately. Nothing to worry about, really. Just my brain processing too much science, fiction entertainment probably." But he knew it wasn't that simple. The dreams felt too real, too urgent. Sometimes he could swear he felt emotions that weren't his own. Fear, loneliness, hope, and something else that felt almost like calling out for help. During his work, he found himself pausing to listen for sounds that never came, looking toward empty corners of his shop as if expecting to see something that wasn't there. The whispers were getting stronger too, words in an unknown language that seemed to carry meaning beyond their sounds. He couldn't understand them, but they made him feel protective, like something small and helpless was depending on him. The rational part of his mind insisted this was just stress and overwork, but deeper instincts suggested otherwise. Meanwhile, the draconian investigation was uncovering disturbing patterns in their own ranks. Commander Theron had begun conducting discreet inquiries into the breeding chamber's security, paying special attention to who had access and when. What he found made his blood run cold with realization. General Mortex requested private access to the breeding chambers twice in the week before the disappearance, reported Security Chief Vex in hushed tones. He claimed he wanted to perform traditional blessing rituals, but there are no records of him actually entering the chambers during his scheduled times. Theron felt pieces of a darker puzzle beginning to fit together. General Mortex was the Emperor's younger brother, and had always been vocal about his belief that the Empire was growing weak through diplomacy. He had openly argued for more aggressive expansion, and had criticized the current policy of peaceful coexistence with other species. "There's more," Vex continued, his voice dropping even lower. 3 of the guards who were supposed to be monitoring the outer perimeter that night reported equipment malfunctions that pulled them away from their posts. All 3 malfunctions occurred within the same hour, and all 3 guards were personally selected for duty by General Mortex. The implications were staggering. If the general was involved in the disappearance of the hatchlings, it could only mean one thing. This wasn't a theft by outsiders, but an internal coup attempt. The royal heirs weren't missing. They had been taken by someone who wanted to control their upbringing and use them for his own political purposes. "We need proof," Theron said carefully, knowing that accusations against the Emperor's brother could not be made lightly. "Continue the investigation, but keep these findings absolutely secret. If General Mortex is involved and he suspects we know, he might harm the hatchlings to prevent discovery." But even as the investigation continued, the 6 young dragons drifted further from their homeworld in their damaged escape pod. Their psychic calls for help grew weaker as their strength faded, but their bond with a distant human mechanic grew stronger. Roy Bennett might not understand what was happening to him, but somewhere deep in space, 6 small beings had chosen him as their protector. The escape pod systems failed one by one, but the hatchlings used their combined psychic abilities to guide their craft toward the human colony systems, drawn by the protective instincts they sensed in Roy's dreams. They were coming home to a guardian who didn't even know he was waiting for them. Dawn broke over New Haven's industrial district with the usual sounds of machinery starting up and workers beginning their shifts. But Roy Bennett hadn't slept at all. The dreams had been so vivid that he'd given up trying to rest and instead had spent the night organizing tools in his workshop, trying to distract himself from the increasingly urgent whispers in his mind. Something was different about today, though. The whispers had changed from desperate calls to what almost sounded like relief, mixed with exhaustion and pain. As Roy moved between the workbenches, checking on the various mining equipment he was repairing, he noticed sounds coming from the heating ducts that ran along the back wall of his shop. Probably just the ventilation system acting up again, he muttered to himself, but the sounds weren't mechanical. They were soft and organic, like small creatures moving around inside the ductwork. Great, now I've got space rats to deal with too. He grabbed a flashlight and a toolkit, planning to open one of the access panels to see what kind of pest had gotten into his heating system. But when he knelt down beside the main duct and listened carefully, the sound stopped completely, as if whatever was inside knew he was there and was trying to hide. Roy opened the access panel slowly, expecting to see the glowing eyes of some scavenging creature reflecting his light back at him. Instead, he found himself staring at 6 pairs of the most beautiful eyes he had ever seen. They were large and luminous, colored like precious gems: sapphire blue, emerald green, golden amber, deep purple, silver white, and rich crimson. What? In the stars, he breathed, reaching for his light to get a better look. The creatures pressed themselves deeper into the ductwork, but they didn't run away. As Roy's flashlight illuminated them fully, he saw that they were unlike anything in any database he'd ever accessed. They looked like tiny dragons from ancient Earth legends, no bigger than house cats but perfectly formed. Their scales shimmered with inner light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with their breathing. One of them, the one with sapphire blue scales, slowly crawled toward the opening, its eyes fixed on Roy's face with an intelligence that was unmistakably sentient. When it reached the edge of the access panel, it extended one small clawed hand toward him in what could only be a gesture of trust. "You're hurt," Roy said softly, noticing scratches along the creature's side and the way it favored one wing. Without thinking, he extended his own hand toward the tiny dragon. "It's okay. I won't hurt you. You're safe here." The moment their skin touched, Roy's mind was flooded with images and emotions that weren't his own. He saw flashes of a massive space station, beings with golden scales arguing in angry voices, the feeling of terrible danger approaching, and then the desperate flight through space in a damaged escape pod that had finally crashed somewhere in New Haven's outer territories. "You're not from around here, are you?" Roy said. And somehow he knew the answer before the images formed in his mind. The tiny dragon, he could sense that her name was something like Hope, projected more images to him. These showed a world of crystal spires and eternal flames, ruled by beings who looked like larger versions of these small creatures. Roy saw golden palaces and vast libraries, technologies that could reshape matter with thought alone, and a civilization that had existed for thousands of years. "Your royalty," Roy whispered in amazement. "These are the missing draconian heirs everyone's been looking for." More images flowed from Hope to Roy's mind, but these were darker and more frightening. He saw a large dragon with silver scales plotting in secret chambers, making plans to take the hatchlings and raise them as weapons rather than rulers. The escape had been their only choice when they sensed his approach, but the journey had nearly killed them. The other 5 hatchlings slowly emerged from the deeper parts of the ductwork, each one more beautiful than the last, Roy could sense. Their individual personalities through the psychic connection. Courage with her emerald scales and fierce protective instincts. Wisdom with golden scales that seemed to hold ancient knowledge. Justice with deep purple scales and an unwavering moral compass. Mercy with silver-white scales and infinite compassion. And honor with crimson scales that burned like inner fire. "You've been calling to me in my dreams," Roy said, and it wasn't a question. "You've been looking for someone to protect you, someone whose mind could hide you from those who want to hurt you. The hatchlings confirmed this with a wave of shared emotion, gratitude, relief, and something that felt remarkably like love. They had searched across space for a mind that could shield them from psychic detection, and human mental patterns were naturally resistant to telepathic intrusion. Roy's protective instincts and gentle nature had drawn them to him like a beacon. "All right," Roy said, making a decision that would change his life forever. "Let's get you six properly taken care of." He carefully lifted each hatchling from the ductwork, noting their various injuries and signs of malnutrition. Their escape pod had sustained serious damage during the journey, and they had been surviving on minimal life support for weeks. They needed medical attention, proper food, and a safe place to recover. Roy's workshop wasn't exactly designed for housing royalty, but his human ingenuity kicked in as he began adapting the space for his unexpected guests. He moved several pieces of equipment to create a more comfortable area near the heating system, where the temperature was warmest, and he used soft cloths and cushions to create nests that would support their small forms properly. "I don't know what dragons eat," he admitted to them, "but I've got some nutrient paste and protein bars. Will that work until I can figure out something better?" The hatchlings shared their dietary needs through the psychic link, and Roy was relieved to discover that they could process most organic compounds. Their young systems were adaptable, and human food would sustain them while they recovered from their ordeal. As he worked to make them comfortable, Roy began to understand the true scope of what had happened. These weren't just missing pets or valuable commodities. They were the future rulers of one of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations, and someone from within their own species had tried to steal them for political purposes. "Your uncle," Roy said as he fed small pieces of protein bar to Justice, who seemed the weakest of the group. "He wanted to control you, to turn you into weapons instead of leaders." The hatchlings confirmed this with shared images of General Mortex, showing Roy how they had sensed his approach and the dark intentions. In his mind, their bodyguard, a female dragon named Captain Vale, had sacrificed herself to help them escape, buying them precious time to reach their small ship and flee into space. "She saved your lives," Roy said softly, and the hatchlings radiated grief and gratitude for their fallen protector. Over the next few hours, Roy worked to improve their hiding place, using his mechanical skills to create better ventilation, warmer sleeping areas, and even a crude communication system that would alert him if anyone approached the workshop while he was away. His human creativity produced solutions that even advanced draconian technology couldn't match. Improvised shielding made from mining equipment that would mask their psychic signatures, and security devices built from spare parts. "We need to be careful," Roy told them as he installed the last of his makeshift detection equipment. "Your people are searching for you, and some of them probably have good intentions. But if your uncle's people find you first, they might try to take you back to him." The hatchlings understood completely. They had escaped one trap, only to find themselves in need of protection from their own kind. But they had chosen their guardian well. Roy Bennett might be just a simple mechanic, but his human determination and protective instincts were exactly what 6 frightened young dragons needed. Outside the workshop, Draconian patrol ships continued their systematic search of human space, growing closer to New Haven with each passing day. The investigation was about to reach the small colony world, and Roy would soon have to face the might of a galactic empire to protect 6 small beings who had entrusted him with their lives. 2 days had passed since Roy discovered his unusual guests, and the workshop had transformed into something between a nursery and a fortress. The hatchlings were recovering quickly under his care, their injuries healing, and their strength returning. As they adapted to their new sanctuary, Roy found himself learning more about dragon physiology and psychology than any human had ever known. Hope, the sapphire-scaled leader of the group, had taken to perching on Roy's shoulder while he worked, her tiny claws gripping his shirt as she watched him repair mining equipment with fascination. Through their psychic connection, she shared her amazement at human ingenuity. The way Roy could take broken machines and make them work again using nothing but creativity and determination. "Your people build things to last forever," Roy said as he welded a cracked support beam. But humans, we build things that can be fixed when they break. Sometimes that's more useful in the long run. Courage, with her emerald scales that seemed to catch every available light, had appointed herself as the group's guardian. She positioned herself near the workshop's main entrance and used her developing psychic abilities to scan for approaching minds. Her protective instincts reminded Roy of a watchdog, except this particular guard was capable of detecting threats from several kilometers away. Wisdom spent most of her time exploring Roy's collection of technical manuals and repair guides. Her golden scales shimmered as she absorbed information at a rate that left Roy speechless. Within hours, she had memorized the specifications for every piece of equipment in the workshop and was beginning to understand the principles behind human mechanical engineering. "You learn faster than any computer I've ever seen," Roy told her, as she quickly grasped the concept of hydraulic pressure systems. "Your people must have incredible schools." Through their shared connection, Wisdom showed him images of the great libraries on their homeworld, vast crystalline structures that contained the accumulated knowledge of thousands of years. Young dragons learned through direct mind-to-mind transfer, absorbing centuries of information in mere moments. But human learning was different, slower but more creative. Building understanding through experimentation and innovation, Justice, her purple scales dark as deep space, had become fascinated with Roy's moral decision-making process. She watched as he chose to share his limited food supplies equally among them, as he worked extra hours to ensure their comfort, as he risked his own safety to protect them from discovery. Her species valued honor and righteousness. But Roy's casual goodness seemed to operate on a different level entirely. Mercy, whose silver-white scales seemed to glow with inner light, had developed a special talent for sensing Roy's emotional state. When he was tired or frustrated, she would curl up against his neck and project feelings of calm and comfort. Her empathic abilities were remarkably strong for such a young dragon, and she used them to ease the stress that came with hiding 6 of the galaxy's most wanted beings. Honor, the smallest of the group with crimson scales that pulsed like heartbeats, had taken responsibility for organizing their sleeping arrangements and ensuring that everyone stayed hidden when visitors approached the workshop. His sense of duty was impressive for someone so young, and he treated the task of remaining concealed as a matter of personal pride. As the days passed, Roy began to understand that he wasn't just hiding refugees. He was participating in something unprecedented. No human had ever formed such a close bond with members of the draconian royal family. The knowledge and perspectives they shared with him were reshaping his understanding of the galaxy and humanity's place within it. "Your people have something special," Hope told him during one of their evening conversations, her thoughts flowing into his mind like warm honey. "You don't have psychic abilities or energy weapons or ships that can destroy planets, but you have something we've never encountered before." "What's that?" Roy asked as he adjusted the temperature controls for their sleeping area. "You care about individuals rather than just species," Wisdom explained, her golden eyes reflecting the workshop's soft lighting. "Most galactic civilizations think in terms of populations and resources and political advantages, but humans seem to form personal connections that transcend those boundaries." Roy considered this as he watched the 6 hatchlings settle into their makeshift nests. Each one had developed a unique relationship with him based on their individual personalities and needs. He didn't see them as valuable political assets or future rulers. He saw them as 6 young beings who needed protection and guidance. "Maybe that's because we're still young as a species," Roy said thoughtfully. "We haven't had time to develop the kind of detachment that comes with centuries of galactic politics." The hatchlings shared this observation among themselves through rapid psychic communication that felt like distant music in Roy's mind. They were beginning to understand that their bond with him represented something new in galactic relations. A friendship based on mutual respect and affection rather than political necessity or strategic advantage. During their 3rd night together, the hatchlings revealed more details about the conspiracy that had forced them to flee. General Mortex had not acted alone in his attempt to control their upbringing. He had allies throughout the draconian military, who believed that the Empire had grown weak through peaceful coexistence with other species. "He wanted to raise us as weapons," Justice explained, her purple scales darkening with remembered fear. We would have been taught to see other species as inferior, to use our abilities for conquest rather than protection. Your bodyguard, Captain Vale, she discovered the plot, Courage added, her emerald scales flickering with grief. She tried to warn the Emperor, but General Mortex's supporters were already moving to intercept her message. Roy felt a surge of admiration for the dragon, who had sacrificed herself to save the hatchlings. She sounds like someone worth remembering. She was the best of us, Honor said softly, his crimson scales pulsing with emotion. She taught us that true strength comes from protecting those who cannot protect themselves. As Roy listened to their stories, he began to understand the full scope of what was at stake. These weren't just 6 young dragons. They were the future of an entire civilization. How they were raised and what they learned would determine whether the Draconian Empire became a force for peace or returned to its ancient ways of conquest and domination. You're learning things here that you never would have learned in a palace, Roy observed as he watched them work together to solve a mechanical puzzle he had given them. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. The hatchlings had indeed been learning lessons that no royal education could provide. They saw how Roy treated everyone with equal respect regardless of their station, how he shared his resources freely, how he took pride in honest work rather than inherited privilege. These were concepts that challenged everything they had been taught about leadership and responsibility. Meanwhile, Roy was retrofitting his workshop with increasingly sophisticated concealment measures. Using his knowledge of mining equipment and salvaged electronics, he had created a sensor-dampening field that would mask the hatchlings' psychic signatures from all but the most intensive scans. His human creativity had produced security systems that even advanced draconian technology would have difficulty detecting. I've been thinking about something, Roy said as he calibrated the last of his improvised shielding devices. What happens when your people do find you? How do we make sure you end up with the right ones? This was the question that haunted all of them. The draconian search fleets were getting closer to New Haven, and eventually they would arrive to investigate the human colony. When that happened, Roy would have to make decisions that could affect the fate of the entire galaxy. We trust you, Hope said simply, speaking for all 6 of them. You have shown us what it means to care for others without expecting anything in return. Whatever you decide, we will stand by your choice. Roy felt the weight of that trust settling on his shoulders like a mantle of responsibility. 6 Royal Dragons had placed their lives and their future in the hands of a simple human mechanic, and he was determined not to let them down. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The Draconian investigation fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of New Haven's system, with enough firepower to level a small moon. Roy felt the hatchlings' distress through their psychic bond as massive energy signatures appeared on every sensor in the colony. The moment they had all been dreading had finally arrived. Stay calm, Roy whispered to his small charges as they huddled together in their hiding place. Remember what we practiced? Keep your psychic signatures as low as possible and let me do the talking if anyone comes to the workshop. Commander Theron stood on the bridge of the Eternal Flame, studying the peaceful human colony spread across New Haven's surface. The settlements looked innocent enough: mining operations, agricultural domes, small residential districts where families lived simple lives far from the galaxy's political complexities. But his investigation had taught him to be suspicious of appearances. Begin deep scans of the entire colony, he ordered his crew. Focus on areas with unusual energy readings or any structures that might be capable of hiding psychic signatures. If the missing royals are here, we will find them. The scans began immediately, powerful sensors probing every building and every basement, searching for any trace of draconian life signs. Most of the readings came back negative, showing only human settlements going about their daily routines. But there were a few locations that showed unusual electromagnetic patterns, including Roy's workshop in the industrial district. Sir, reported sensor technician Cray. We're detecting some kind of interference pattern from a repair facility in Sector 7. It's not strong enough to hide life signs, but it's definitely artificial. Could be primitive sensor jamming equipment. Theron nodded thoughtfully as he studied the readings. Send a ground team to investigate, but approach carefully. If someone is using jamming equipment, they might have other surprises waiting for us. As the Draconian shuttles descended toward New Haven's surface, Roy made final preparations to protect his young friends. He had spent days planning for this moment, creating contingency plans and backup systems that would give them the best possible chance of survival. The hatchlings watched with admiration as their human guardian worked with calm efficiency, despite the overwhelming odds against them. "No matter what happens," Roy told them as he activated the last of his concealment devices, "remember that you have choices. You don't have to go with anyone you don't trust, and you don't have to become weapons just because someone wants you to." The ground team that arrived at Roy's workshop consisted of 6 heavily armed Draconian soldiers led by Captain Venn, an experienced investigator who had been searching for the missing royals since the day they disappeared. They approached the building cautiously, their sensors detecting the electromagnetic interference that had caught their attention from orbit. "Attention, human," Captain Venn called out as his team surrounded the workshop. "We are conducting an official investigation. On behalf of the Draconian Empire, open your facility for inspection immediately." Roy took a deep breath and opened the main door, trying to project an attitude of cooperative confusion rather than guilty concealment. "Of course, officers. How can I help you? Is there some kind of problem?" Captain Venn studied the human carefully, noting his calm demeanor and apparently genuine willingness to cooperate. Most beings showed fear or hostility when confronted by armed Draconian soldiers, but this mechanic seemed merely curious about their presence. "We are searching for 6 missing individuals of great importance to our empire," Venn explained as his team began scanning the workshop with portable sensors. "Our orbital scans detected unusual energy patterns emanating from this location." "Oh, that's probably my jury-rigged sensor dampener," Roy said, pointing to a collection of modified mining equipment near the back wall. "I built it to keep electromagnetic interference from affecting my precision work. Some of the mining gear puts out pretty strong fields when it's running." The explanation sounded plausible enough, and the device Roy indicated did indeed seem to be the source of the interference patterns they had detected. But Captain Venn was a thorough investigator, and something about the situation felt incomplete. "Mind if we take a look around anyway?" Venn asked, though it wasn't really a question. "Standard procedure, you understand?" Roy nodded and stepped aside, allowing the Draconian soldiers to conduct their search. He watched nervously as they examined every corner of the workshop, their sensors probing for any sign of the missing hatchlings. The concealment systems he had built were working perfectly, so far. But as the search continued, Roy noticed one of the soldiers lingering near the heating duct where he had first found his small friends. The soldier's scanner was picking up something that made him frown with concentration, and Roy felt his heart rate increase as the Draconian knelt down to examine the access panel more closely. "Captain," the soldier called out, "I'm getting some unusual readings from this ventilation system. Could be thermal residue from small life forms." Roy's mind raced as he tried to think of an innocent explanation. "Yeah, I've been having trouble with space rats lately. Little pests keep getting into the ductwork looking for warm places to nest. I've been trying to flush them out, but they're pretty clever about hiding." Captain Venn approached the heating duct with renewed interest, his own scanner detecting the same thermal patterns that had caught his subordinate's attention. The readings were consistent with small warm-blooded creatures, but there was something about the energy signatures that seemed familiar. "Open it," Venn ordered. Roy complied, removing the access panel to reveal the interior of the ductwork. Captain Venn shined his light into the space, expecting to see evidence of small scavenging animals. Instead, he found himself staring into 6 pairs of unmistakably intelligent eyes that reflected his light like precious gems. "By the eternal flames," Venn breathed, recognizing the missing royals immediately. The hatchlings emerged slowly from their hiding place, their small forms moving with the natural grace and dignity of their royal bloodline. They showed no fear as they faced the Draconian soldiers, instead projecting an aura of calm authority that made the hardened warriors step back respectfully. Roy moved protectively closer to the hatchlings, his human instincts overriding any concern for his own safety. "They're under my protection," he said firmly. "They came to me for help, and I won't let anyone harm them." Captain Venn stared at the scene before him in amazement. The missing heirs to the Draconian throne were alive and apparently healthy, being guarded by a human mechanic who clearly cared more about their welfare than his own survival. The situation was unlike anything in his military experience. Commander Theron must be informed immediately, Ven said, reaching for his communicator. But before he could make the call, Hope stepped forward and projected her thoughts directly into the captain's mind. The images she shared showed the truth about their disappearance. General Mortex's conspiracy, Captain Vale's sacrifice, and their desperate flight to find someone who would protect them rather than use them as weapons. Captain Ven staggered under the weight of the revelation, his understanding of the situation shifting completely as he absorbed the hatchlings' memories. "General Mortex," he whispered. "He's been leading the search efforts. He's been steering us away from finding you." The other soldiers gathered around as Hope shared her story with all of them, showing them how Roy had cared for the royal heirs without any thought of reward or political advantage. The human had risked everything to protect 6 beings he had never met before, motivated only by compassion and a sense of right and wrong. "This changes everything," Captain Ven said as he finally understood the scope of the conspiracy they were dealing with. "If General Mortex finds out we've located the royals, he'll try to take them for himself." Roy stepped forward, his protective instincts fully engaged. "Then maybe it's time to make sure the right people know where they are." Commander Theron received Captain Ven's encrypted transmission, while the Eternal Flame hung in orbit above New Haven, and the contents nearly made him drop his communication device. The missing royals had been found. They were alive and healthy, and they were being protected by a human mechanic who had uncovered a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of the draconian military. "Secure all communications immediately," Theron ordered his bridge crew. "I want General Mortex's access to our command systems terminated, and I want a direct channel to the Emperor that bypasses all military networks." The evidence that Hope had shared through Captain Ven painted a clear picture of treachery and betrayal. General Mortex had indeed been sabotaging the search efforts, using his position to ensure that the hatchlings would never be found by loyal forces. His plan had been to eventually discover them himself and claim credit for their rescue, giving him control over their upbringing and future. Within hours, loyal draconian forces had moved to arrest General Mortex and his conspirators, the generals. Supporters put up fierce resistance, but they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered by troops who had learned the truth about the missing royals. The attempted coup collapsed, as soldiers chose loyalty to the legitimate heirs over allegiance to a would-be usurper. Emperor Dracon himself arrived at New Haven aboard the Imperial flagship Celestial Fire, his massive golden form radiating barely controlled fury at the betrayal he had uncovered. He had come expecting to punish whoever had stolen his great-grandchildren, but instead found a situation that challenged everything he thought he knew about leadership and loyalty. The Emperor's first meeting with Roy Bennett took place in the human's modest workshop. Surrounded by the tools and equipment that had helped hide 6 royal dragons from the most powerful search effort in galactic history, Draken's enormous frame barely fit through the doorway, but he approached with surprising gentleness when he saw the hatchlings gathered protectively around their human guardian. "You are the one who protected my heirs," the Emperor said, his voice like distant thunder. Roy stood his ground despite being dwarfed by the massive dragon ruler. "I did what anyone should do when someone asks for help," he replied simply. "They needed protection, and I was in a position to provide it." The hatchlings immediately began sharing their experiences with their great-grandfather, projecting images and emotions that showed how Roy had cared for them. The Emperor saw through their eyes how the human had shared his food, created comfortable sleeping spaces, worked long hours to build concealment devices, and risked his own safety to keep them hidden from those who would harm them. "This human has taught you things," Emperor Draken observed, studying his great-grandchildren with ancient eyes. "You carry yourselves differently than when you left our world." Hope stepped forward to speak for her siblings. "Roy has shown us what it means to lead through service rather than command. He protected us not because he had to, but because he chose to. We have learned about courage that comes from compassion rather than conquest." The Emperor listened, as each hatchling shared what they had discovered during their time with Roy. Courage spoke of strength that protected rather than dominated. Wisdom described knowledge gained through experimentation, rather than inherited memory. Justice explained fairness that considered individuals rather than just species. Mercy demonstrated compassion that required no reward. And honor showed duty that came from love rather than obligation. These are not traditional royal lessons, the Emperor said thoughtfully. Maybe that's exactly what they needed, Roy replied. Respect, Your Majesty. But these six have the potential to be something more than traditional rulers. They could bridge the gap between species in ways that pure power never could. Emperor Draken studied the human who had dared to suggest that royal education might be improved upon. Any other being making such a statement would have faced immediate punishment. But the evidence was undeniable. His great-grandchildren had learned valuable lessons that no palace tutor could have provided. You speak boldly for someone facing the ruler of an empire, the Emperor observed. I speak honestly for someone who cares about six young beings who trusted me with their lives, Roy corrected. They're not just heirs to a throne, they're individuals. With their own thoughts and feelings and potential, they deserve to have choices about their future. The hatchlings watched this exchange with fascination. Seeing their great-grandfather encounter someone who refused to be intimidated by imperial authority, Roy's calm determination impressed even the Emperor, who had rarely met beings willing to stand their ground in his presence. What would you have me do? Emperor Draken asked, genuinely curious about this human's perspective. Let them choose, Roy said simply. They're old enough to have opinions about their education and their future roles. Ask them what they want to learn and how they want to serve their people. They might surprise you with their wisdom. The Emperor turned to his great-grandchildren, seeing them through new eyes. What do you choose? The six hatchlings looked at each other, then at Roy, then back at their great-grandfather. Hope spoke for all of them. We want to learn about both our heritage and the wider galaxy. We want to understand how to bring species together, rather than keep them apart. And we want Roy to be part of our education, because he has taught us things we never would have learned otherwise. You would make this human your teacher, the Emperor asked. We would make him our friend, Wisdom corrected. Teachers provide knowledge, but friends provide understanding. Emperor Draken considered this request, recognizing the unprecedented nature of what his heirs were asking. No non-Draconian had ever been granted such access to royal education, but the results spoke for themselves. His great-grandchildren had grown and learned in ways that traditional methods had never achieved. Very well, the Emperor decided. Roy Bennett, I name you Royal Guardian to the heirs of the Draconian throne. You will be granted status as an honorary member of our court, with full authority to participate in their education and development. Roy felt the weight of the honor being bestowed upon him. Your Majesty, I'm just a mechanic. I don't know anything about court protocols or diplomatic procedures, which is exactly why you will be valuable, the Emperor replied. My heirs need to understand perspectives from throughout the galaxy, not just from within palace walls. The arrangements that followed transformed both human and Draconian societies in ways that no one had anticipated. New Haven became an embassy world where young dragons and human engineers worked side by side, sharing knowledge and perspectives that benefited both civilizations. The hatchlings split their time between the crystal spires of their homeworld and the practical workshops of human space. Roy found himself in the remarkable position of being the first human ever granted full access to Draconian royal education. He learned about technologies that could reshape matter with thought alone, about histories stretching back thousands of years, about the complex relationships between species that had coexisted since before humans had achieved spaceflight. In return, he taught the hatchlings and other young dragons about human ingenuity, about solving problems through creativity rather than raw power, about the value of individual perspectives and the strength that came from diversity. His simple workshop became a classroom where ancient wisdom met innovative thinking. The six royal hatchlings grew into their roles as future leaders with a unique understanding of what it meant to serve others. They had learned that true strength came from protecting those who needed protection, that real wisdom involved listening to different viewpoints, and that lasting leadership was built on trust and mutual respect rather than fear and domination. Years later, when diplomatic crises arose between species, It was often the dragon heirs who served as mediators, their human-influenced education. Having given them perspectives that traditional leaders lacked, they understood that differences between species could be sources of strength rather than division. Roy continued to work in his repair shop, but now it served a dual purpose as a training ground for young diplomats from across the galaxy. Beings who had never imagined working together found common ground over broken machinery and shared problems, discovering that cooperation could achieve results that competition never could. The friendship between a human mechanic and 6 royal dragons had become something larger than anyone had anticipated, proof that understanding and compassion could bridge any gap between species, and that sometimes the most important lessons came from the most unexpected teachers. The galaxy was a better place because one ordinary human had chosen to protect 6 extraordinary beings who needed his help.